All right. Are we living? Are we living? Oh, it won't? Okay, that's fine. I'm on Altar Live, so we're live. We're a couple minutes early, and I'm not a stand-up comedian, so I'm not going to tell a couple of jokes to all of you guys. I'll just stand here and smile. Miss you all today. I'm doing well. I'm doing pretty good. I've got my hoodie on, so that I can stay nice and warm in this chilly building. It gets a little bit chilly sometimes. Oh, it's good to be with you all. Let's see. What happened this week that I could share that would not be a part of my homily for today? It's been a pretty uneventful week because I've been just laying low in COVID protocol. Oh, a little bit of rapping there for you this morning. I think we're almost at 10:30, and I'm going to get going here as soon as my clock says 10:30 on the dot. I will throw out a little bit of spit with you all. Yeah, you know what I could do while I'm waiting for this? Watch it pop over right now. I could read one of my poems that I've got written in here. The Bane of Ordinary. A seedling unplanted begs. Oh, it's 10:30. Good morning, Lighthouse. I was just reading a poem that I wrote a couple weeks ago called The Bane of Ordinary. But we are here. We are live. Glad to be with you. Glad to have you on Altar Live with us today. It is the second Sunday of January 2022. This is going to be a good year. I think every year that we have and that we're able to is a good year. In fact, this morning in my meditation time, I was preoccupied with the thoughts that as long as I have this, anything can be redeemed, anything can be made right, anything can be made whole, anything. And it's this thing that we're told in Genesis 1 is the reminder, the every second, every moment reminder that we have God at work inside of us, and we're conscious of this, something that plant life isn't, animal kingdom isn't, but we are conscious of this, or we have the potential to be conscious and aware of the nearness of God. But it is it's a Sunday. It's time to orient our hearts to God, to worship, and I am grateful to be with you. Before we get into what we're going to talk about today, I want to just take a moment and offer up a prayer to set this time apart for God. And so I encourage you just to, wherever you are, if you want, orient your heart towards God, your thoughts, your posture. You can put your posture in a place of closeness with God. And let's set this time aside, the next few minutes that we're together, for worship. Oh, Holy One, thank you. Thank you for this moment, this space. Thank you that we are aware enough to set aside some time and worship you. I pray that you would collect our thoughts, our hearts, all of the intentions that are good and beautiful, place them upon an altar, and let it be a sweet-smelling savor to you of worship. We put our faith out there in this naked nothingness, this moment. We suspend it for you, for your divine presence to illuminate our faith, for your divine presence to illuminate our hope and our love. And when we finish with our time here today and complete our time here today, may we have grown closer to you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, this week I got, I came in contact with someone that had COVID, and then I think it was Monday or Tuesday, I began to feel a little bit, I didn't have a cough, or I wasn't sneezing, or I didn't have any congestion or anything like that, or any flu symptoms at all. But I did feel a little weak, and kind of felt like I was on Benadryl. And so I just took starting, I think it was with Tuesday and Wednesday, and just began to move through the rest of my week, kind of low-key, quarantined, stayed in my living space, and just hibernated, so to speak. I think it was on Wednesday. I went to CVS and tried to get in for I looked for some appointments I couldn't get on, so I just went and stood in line, but the line was so long. But anyway, I just want to say thank you to TJ and Carmen both for offering home kits. TJ brought some home kits by and dropped them off here. And I tested negative. Yesterday I tested negative for COVID, but you know how these things are. So I've continued to quarantine, and then this Sunday we canceled the in-gathering person, and we're just online today. But I do want to say thank you for those of you that reached out to me on text. Lisa, I think, reached out on, I think it was maybe Wednesday or Thursday, and just offered prayer, and then she said that she was following along with the podcast that we have, and how much it was really ministering to her, which made me begin to think a little bit about meditation and the benefits of meditation. I've got a couple of text messages this week, one from Cindy, another one from Kim, just saying to me how much the meditation has meant to them, being able to walk through that, listen to it. And Tim reached out this week and said he was really benefiting from it. So I'm happy. I'm glad that it's helping you along. But as we think about meditation, as we think about the contemplative life, I'm really drawn to the idea of, like, why do we do this? What are the benefits? And what's the motivation? And I think the motivation is on several fronts, but what's the motivation to engage in a contemplative life, a meditative life? And even before we get into the benefits of the Christian contemplative life and scriptural meditations, just as a general practice of meditating and contemplating, what are its benefits? And there have been a flurry of studies that have come out over the past decade. In fact, if you go on to TED Talks, you'll see there's talks from professors from Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard. There's neuroplasticity researchers, neurologists. We can just go on and on and on of so many different experts, doctors that have done studies, brain scans, to look at what's actually going on in the brain when someone meditates, all the way through to the benefits, the health benefits of it. And I think in one of these studies, and it's just something that stuck with me, I think I saw it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but it was a brain scan, and it showed a brain that did not practice meditation, And then it compared it to a brain that did practice meditation, and it showed the brain that was practicing meditation almost looked like an Amazon jungle. It was green, it was lit up, it was all in all areas, it was just full of a lot of functioning life. And then the other brain had a lot of gray matter. I tried to look it up today to put it in the link for you to look at. But the point is, it really motivated and inspired me. And I had also sensed, just kind of a sense of aliveness might be the right way to express it when I meditate and contemplate. Today, I was just doing a little bit of research this morning before we came on the call, and I noticed that there was a study that just came out this week that maybe it was in the past 2 weeks, but anyway, it's a recent study that is related to meditation and the immune system, and it specifically was focusing on COVID and people with COVID. And it was fascinating, but this study that's been done by several universities, one is the University of Florida, I think another one was the University of Birmingham. Anyway, several studies that have been done notice that individuals that meditate, that spend, I think it's anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes in meditation, their immune system is boosted. And they're able to fight off COVID, from what these studies were saying, better than those that didn't meditate. There's something about just meditation that boosts the immune system as it relates to COVID, and then as it relates to other autoimmune deficiencies. So this is really interesting. This is really fascinating, and on a natural level, just as it relates to us physically, there's benefits to meditating. But that's not, the only reason why I think one would benefit from meditating. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was in the gym exercising, and I was walking from the elliptus machines into the little studio area where there's the wood floor. And as I was walking, I heard a whisper just say to me something along the lines of, it was just this phrase, contemplative church. The contemplative church. And I heard it, this whisper, the contemplative church, the contemplative church. I went on, continued exercising, and then the next day I heard it again, and it's just kind of like echoing around up here and in here, the contemplative church. And it's got me to thinking about what I sense, and I don't want to say prophetically, I don't think I'm qualified to say that at this point, but I sense a deep kind of curiosity around the Spirit tugging His people into that space of contemplation for a deeper work of healing on a spiritual level in our world. So if you think, if one person in a meditative, contemplative state can develop can enhance their immune system, can fortify their immune system, what would happen collectively if there were many of us? What happens on a collective, on a societal, on a social level to the world around us? And could it be that there are many that are being called into a meditative life and then eventually a contemplative life, which I'll explain the difference between the two in a moment, but could it be that we're being called into that, wooed into that, as a way of bringing healing, as a way of developing a social immune system to the political rhetoric, the bombast, the hype, the polarization, the radicalization that's going on in our country and in our world at large? Is there a way for us to somehow tone that all down? And I think yes, I think so. On December the 26th, Bishop Desmond Tutu passed away. He was 90 years old. For those of you that know of Desmond Tutu. I'm sure you've thought and reflected about both his life, his influence within South Africa and in Africa at large, just the continent at large and other countries of Africa. A person that really demonstrated Christ's presence and love, social justice, compassion with the truth and reconciliation, trials that were set up after apartheid. And I was thinking about Desmond Tutu's life, and it triggered thoughts, of course, of Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., and then, of course, all of that got connected to Gandhi for me. I mean, I just kind of followed that line back, and then it brought back a anecdote from Basil Pennington's book on centering prayer, where he describes the societal transformations that the simple practice of meditation and the contemplative life have. He said there was an 80-year-old South African Christian woman who attempted to organize her people in her country around Gandhi's conviction that if only 1% of people within a country, within a community would meditate, peace would come to that people. This became a conviction for her. Her name was Winnie Young. It became a conviction for her to see her country was she was in South Africa. It was so ravaged by violence and racial inequality due to apartheid. And so she set out to accomplish this peace by organizing contemplative retreats, centering prayer retreats, calling people to this. And Basil Pennington, in his book on centering prayer, says that, quote, the result of this effort, this endeavor that she did, was a new phenomenon among the human family, boards of reconciliation rather than war crime trials happened. And there was the beginning of a restoration, a societal restoration. I want to pause right here and say, last week we did some meditation practices, and we focused on the hand. If you remember, we walked through the hand, which was really more of a personal questing. Like it was more self-centered, self-oriented in that moment that we did, which is good. Like imagine yourself, you're in the airplane, and what do they tell you if the oxygen fails and oxygen mask fall? Make sure you put one on your face first before you try to put one on your child. And it's important that we take care of our own spiritual self. The Christian contemplative life leads one into places of intercession, leads one into meditating and contemplating on the healing of the world, the healing of a land, of a people. So it moves beyond just that self-centered space. But we did that. We started there last week, and then this week we're going to kind of move forward into an intermediate form of meditation. Last week we were, I would say, a little bit more of a beginner phase, and we're going to move into an intermediate phase this week. But before we get into that, I think it's important to kind of set the motivation. Why do we go about doing this? And I think there are several reasons. I've given you a couple here right now. Like you could say, I want to engage in a daily meditation and a contemplative life because it's healthy for me physically. It's a part of an overall holistic life that includes exercise, it includes goals and whatnot. That could be one reason. Another reason could be because you want to develop yourself spiritually. Like on the one hand, it's good for you physically, but on the other hand, you might say, I want to grow myself spiritually. And so that could be another reason why one would want to meditate or contemplate. And there are different forms of prayer. This week, when we talk about Lectio Divina, we'll engage in both verbal praying and then the listening praying as well, and then the stillness. So it could be for spiritual growth that one would want to get into a meditative place and a contemplative life. What Basil Pennington suggests, and I'm putting out there for all of us to consider here today, is that there is somewhat of a social responsibility that we have, almost a civic duty that we have as citizens of heaven, to enter into these places deep in our awareness with God and allow the Spirit of God to rest within us and flow through us with what Paul says in Romans chapter 8, unutterable utterances with groanings that cannot be uttered. Paul says, we don't know how to pray for ourselves as we would think. We don't understand how to pray for ourselves. Plural, as a community, as a nation. But the Spirit itself makes intercession through us with unutterable utterances. Now, what is this unutterable utterances? Well, I think it includes, maybe you could say it includes several components or categories of unutterable things. One certainly could be glossolalia. That might be part of that category of unutterable utterances. Some say it could be just that when you don't know what to say and you're crying and you just find yourself kind of groaning or just kind of in a desperate state. There just aren't any words. That would fit within that category as well. But I also think there is this thing of silence. It's an unutterable utterance. You're uttering something, but it's not, it's coming from here, it's coming out here, but it's not, there is no articulation. One of the things that I've said a couple of times here is that when we talk about spiritual realities and we use language to talk about spiritual realities, we are at a significant disadvantage because we're talking about realities and truths that language cannot capture. And so we just kind of hit around it. And so we have to trust that as we're speaking, somehow the Spirit is taking that and it's communicating that, and we get it down here, even though the words sometimes just don't get it. It's language in the service of the unutterable, right? It's language is having to serve something that can't be expressed. And we're doing the best that we can, and we're trusting. Like even now, I'm trusting that what I'm saying is pinging here in you, even though it may not make a lot of sense up here. Now, if silent praying, if meditative praying is a form of the Spirit interceding through us, then it is critical that we engage this, even if it's only 5 minutes a day or 1 minute a day, like just 1 minute of silent waiting on God can be more valuable than 23 hours and 59 minutes of your day that is spent in productivity, getting things done, making it that 1 minute of just holding your faith, your naked faith out there and suspending it in the presence of God with no words, no expectations, no pressures, just trust, vulnerable trust that maybe God speaks, maybe God doesn't. Maybe I sense God's presence, maybe I don't. But this waiting on God is absolutely worth it. I remember I was probably 20. In fact, I was 20. I have it in my written down in my journal here. I was 20 years old, and I had this incredible experience. I was just beginning my, I guess, kind of novice approach to God and the spiritual disciplines, and oriented my heart towards pursuing God with everything in me. And I was maybe 9 months into this journey, maybe 12 months into this journey, but I was just getting into it. And when I was younger, I was very intense, and I was an extremist. Like, I would go from one extreme of commitment and all in to the other extreme, just, you know. And on this particular Sunday, I remember we had a missionary that came to our church. She was a missionary from Africa. Her and her husband, her name was Nona, and her husband's name was Bug. They had spent their life in the continent of Africa, and just serving in different countries around Africa. And at this time of her life, she was in her in the elder years of her life. And she was a just incredible communicator, speaker, teacher, preacher. Her husband would travel with her, and he would kind of follow along and didn't say much, but was always participating with her in her communication. And she came to our church on a Sunday morning. And as I sat there, her text, it's interesting because when I look back over my life, I remember maybe, especially those years, I remember, I think, 2 sermons from all of those years of going to church. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Thursday. I go to church 4 or 5 times a week. I can't remember any sermon except for 2. And this is one of the sermons that I remember. It had such a profound impact on my life. She took her text from the Gospel of John, chapter 18, and or maybe it was, 19, verse 17. And her text was, so the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. And she proceeded to talk about, she used this as a metaphor or as an analogy, that the place of the crucified life happens in the skull. She talked about the mental battle, the battles between the ears. It's all happening up here, and then she connected this. She was talking about how Jesus was crucified at the place of the skull, and how that our life, when it is fully surrendered, it's going to happen up here. Like this will be the place that gets conquered. This will be the place that we have victory. It'll be, we're thinking freer. We're living freer because we're thinking freer, that our thinking will have been liberated, right? And so she's talking about that. And then she jumps over to 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3, and I think it's verse 3 of chapter 10 of 2 Corinthians. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. And so she connects this reading with that one. For the weapons we fight with are not weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And we will be ready to punish every act of disobedience once your obedience is complete. And then she explained this verse as the battle is this, the weapons of our warfare, they're not natural, but they are mighty through God. They pull down strongholds. And she said all of this is going on up here, that we reach a place in our spiritual formation, in our spiritual journey, where we're gaining ground, we're growing in victory, because up here there is this incredible advance. Strongholds are coming down. Any knowledge that is of a lie or of an untruth or of a limiting belief or any of that gets pulled down up here. And then we bring our thoughts into captivity to Christ, in surrender to Christ. And that through that, if you can imagine, like you're bringing it into captivity of Christ, and through that it comes out and it grows, it blossoms into truth and freedom, peace and joy, all of that. And she says this all happened up here. Well, it was an amazing sermon. I remember sitting there and thinking, I want this. I want this to happen in my life. And in our church culture and tradition at the time, they'd give what were called altar calls. And so they invite people to come forward for prayer, and you'd come forward for prayer. And then there'd be a prayer team down there that would pray for you. And so she gave an invitation to come forward. I remember going down, kneeling, praying. A couple people prayed for me, and then I remember lifting my head up and looking around, and everybody was gone. The lights were out. Everyone had gone home. It was a Sunday morning. They went out to lunch or whatever they were doing, and I was down there. I'm like, and then I had this crazy thought. I thought, I wonder what would happen if I stayed here all afternoon until service tonight, and I just looked at these two scriptures and I prayed them over and over and over from whatever it was at that point, probably 1 or 12:30 until 5:30. Like, what would happen? Well, I'm young. I don't have any agenda. I have nothing really going on at that point in my life. I'm thinking I could do it. Like, I have no pressing needs or anything to really do, so I'll attempt it. I journal about it here in my journal, but I was rereading it today, and several things happened. I did it, and there were several things that happened. One, I remember I had this incredible, it's like a battle with a cinnamon roll. No joke. In Stockton, we had this place that was called Hoosiers, and they had the most incredible, fresh-baked, homemade cinnamon rolls. And they were about this big, right, covered with buttery icing and just thick. You know, they tight round and just thick with cinnamon. And I remember once I had made up my mind that I was going to do this prayer, I got my Bible, I went into a prayer room, and I knelt down, I started to just look at this and pray, and all I could think about for like 30 minutes was, I want a cinnamon roll. I want a cinnamon roll. I want a cinnamon roll so bad. And I kept thinking about, maybe I should just go get it because this is driving me nuts, and then I'll come back after I have the cinnamon roll, and I'll pray the rest of the time. And but then I thought, no, maybe this was part of the battle. And I was like, man, like, some people have real battles. Why am I battling a cinnamon roll? Like, some people have some, like, for real struggles that they work through. And my battle is a cinnamon roll. So I get through that. And then for the next, 4 hours or so, I continue to pray, and my prayer mostly consisted of, like, me rocking back and forth. I was holding my Bible like this. Like, I don't know what any of these words mean. I don't have, like, a formal education in theology or exegesis, or at this point, I don't have any of that. All I know is just, like, what it literally says, and it makes no sense to me here, but here, it makes a lot of sense. Like, down here, I was like, she's right. Whatever she's saying, this is right, and I want this, but I don't it's just my rationale. I couldn't connect all the dots. So I sat there, and I would look at the same verse over, and I'd go back between 2 Corinthians 10 and John 19. I'd go back and forth, back and forth. I would envision, like, what would that place of the skull look like where Jesus was crucified, and then the battleground going on right here in my own life, and then what was that battle? What were the thoughts that were constantly negative and challenging me? And I would just pray, and I would pray. And I would just I'd rock back and forth like this. And sometimes, and eventually I reached a point where I wasn't saying anything. I had no more words to say. Words were failing me. And so I just sat there and looked at it over and over and thought deeply and deeply. And this went on all the way until our evening service. And the way that our church was set up is we had a choir. And so the choir would typically come in about 4:30 and practice, and then the church service would start at 5:30. So I'm back in the back. I'm praying, and again, I can't stress enough. Like, there was no. I was not a seasoned prayer warrior. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know. I didn't have the right words. I didn't know any. There were no methods. I didn't have any of that. All I knew was just go for it and, bang my head against the wall and fight cinnamon rolls. That was basically what was happening there. And it was so gradual, I didn't notice the change that went on. Like, if you would have taken what happened when I started at 12:30 and what resulted at 5:30 and just put me here and then, like, showed me this, I would have said, oh my God, there's a huge change that happened to me. But because it took so long, it was such a gradual such a gradual movement. I didn't notice it from second to second, minute to minute, even hour to hour. I just didn't notice what was happening to me. But I continued just to kind of press through it, pray. There were times when I would get kind of emotional about my inability to pray, my inability to articulate. There are times when I felt like I don't understand what's going on here. I just know something's pulling me, and I want to try this. And at 4:30, I got up. I could hear the choir was practicing. I could hear them practicing. I thought, well, it's almost about time for their service to start, so I'll head on in there. And I walked around the back, and the sanctuary was a large sanctuary. It set about 2,200 people. And so I walked in the back door, and I'm standing in the back of the sanctuary, and the choir's up there practicing. And I looked down ahead of me, and it was kind of peppered with 2 or 3, maybe more than that, maybe like 20 people were kind of scattered around. So there's hardly anyone out there that comes that early, right, just sitting there. And like down 10, 15 rows, halfway down, there was a lady that was sitting there. Her back was to me. I didn't even notice her. I'm just kind of looking at the choir. And I was still kind of in this, like if you hear like a fluorescent light, you know how a fluorescent light has like a buzz, like a zzz, just kind of has that buzz. I had this kind of like feeling of like this buzz, like a spiritual buzz going on. Like zzz. I could feel that. I felt pure, focused. I don't know on what, but I did feel like focused. I sensed just clarity of vision. I sensed strength, like there was just, I really felt strong. I don't know like what was strong, but there was strength, something going on there like that. And peace, I was at peace. I'm standing there in the back, and choir's practicing some song, and I noticed, like in my lower periphery, the lady that's sitting just a few rows down, I noticed she kind of does this. She's kind of looking around like this, and I'm just standing there. I do not know her. I don't know who she is, and she kind of looks like, and then she kind of turns all the way around and looks back at me. And when she looks at me, she just kind of has this like surprised look on her face. And then she gets up and she walks over to me, and she gets in front of me, and she says, I feel your presence. I feel something's, that God's Spirit is just all over you. And she said, and there's like a glow. I was like, this was my one moment, folks, to have a halo. This was it. That was my one moment to have a halo. And I'm sitting there, and I'm standing there rather, and she's just like, and then she starts crying. And she's just like, I just feel God's presence. And I was like, oh my God, this stuff works. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I just kind of smiled. I didn't know really what to do. I was just kind of like, oh, great. That experience marked for me, it was like a mile marker in my spiritual journey, that I knew there was something to contemplative praying. I knew there was something to meditation, something that I didn't know how to articulate. And I remember bringing it up to one of my professors, and I grew up in a much more, I guess it was an evangelical, Pentecostal evangelical church that didn't have any expression of the contemplative prayer. There were traces of Christian mysticism, but it did not have any of the meditation practices or even contemplation. I didn't know the difference between the two. I just assumed that. I remember bringing it up to a professor in one of my classes, and I mean, this morning, just gets rung over and over in my head. He was like, you know what, it's just not a good thing. It can just lead to all kinds of, opening your mind up for Satan and opening your mind up for darkness, and you just don't want to do that. And I was confused because it was such a profound experience for me. I was confused as to why, I wasn't being instructed this way, but I was so much a novice, and I was trying to trust the wisdom of those that had gone before me, like maybe something bad will happen, that I remember pulling back from that and not engaging in that practice like that anymore. All of my prayer from that point forward was mostly, for the most part, it was mostly verbal praying, praying in other tongues, but it was me just talking. And the only time I would listen is if I had my Bible open and I was reading it, because that was okay. But to reach a place of, like, to suspend my faith, to suspend thoughts, and just trust myself to God's presence, I did not do that again until 2015, September, I think it was like the 9th or the 8th, something like this. I had a profound experience related to Lectio Divina. And it opened that back up, like that was a part. I could sense that was a part of me. I remember at that point I stepped back into it. I began to practice it. I was no longer like concerned or where I just took it and ran with it. Now, the reason why I bring all this up today in our time together is just out of a sense that we're being, God is looking for those whose heart is sensitive to waiting on Him. That's why. That may be you, and it may not be you. That's not my call to give. I would just suggest, if you're curious, if you're interested, if you really, really want it, if you're in any of those places, if the word meditation, contemplation has come up frequently over the past week or 2 or 3, I would suggest there may be something else at play here beyond just happen chance and coincidence, and it may be that God is calling you into that kind of life. And it's a life, it's a journey. It's not anything that we just kind of do one off, but it's something that we grow in. With that in mind, this week, as we were moving into an intermediate meditative place, Deborah and I felt to just put together both a journal and a podcast on Lectio Divina. I have talked about Lectio Divina from time to time in sermons. I've led us briefly, but this is a little bit more in depth what we're talking about this week. So for those of you that have downloaded the PDF that has the 7-day guide into Lectio Divina, it's really kind of a Lectio Divina for dummies, if you will. And it guides you just one step at a time. Like there's 4 movements. The first movement is the Lectio, the reading. So we just kind of walk you through on one day how to do the reading. Then the next day, it's oratio, how to put into prayer form, to verbalize, to pray out loud what you just read. And then the next day, it's meditatio, which is how to think and reflect on these things. So now you're moving into that silent space, the quiet space, the stillness, and just, thinking through it, like in that internal world, allowing what you've just read out loud and prayed out loud, allowing it to just take on, shape and form and imagination inside of you as you think deeply about it. And you commune from here, from your heart, from the energy, the life force that's inside of you. You communicate with that to God, recognizing that God doesn't speak English and God doesn't speak Hebrew and God doesn't speak, He is not limited to language. And God communicates. It can be like a book of thought in one word in your heart that hits you. That's how God communicates. And you'll sense it, you'll feel it, you'll know it, but you don't have the words for it. It's just intuitively, it's there. So meditatio guides you through that. So there's one day we'll do that. And then there's one day we do contemplatio, which is the contemplation part. It's when you move from The noise of your thoughts, the noise of your inner world, the conversation and the dialogue that's going on in here, and you suspend all of that, and you almost like, sometimes I'll have this image of, I take all of that and I kind of put it on this imaginary altar, and I offer it to God, and I say, okay, now I'm just going to sit in your presence. I'm just going to be quiet and still. I'll set a timer, and I'll just sit there. My mind will sometimes try to reach back up there and grab something off that altar. Or my mind will sometimes be distracted and reach over here and be thinking about what I'm going to eat, what I've got to do, what so-and-so said, what's going on in the news. And then I'll be over here thinking about what's going on in the news. And then I'll have a thought. I'll be like, wait, I'm supposed to be waiting on God. And then I'll go, oh. And I'll go, all right, we're just going to leave the news with the news. We're going to come back here. And then I'll just come back and I'll be like, I'm waiting on you. And I cannot tell you how naked one's faith, that's the phrase, naked faith, that moment is like. Because there's no goal, there's no agenda on my part. At this point, there's no activity that I can engage in. Like, it's not about what I'm doing. It's about what's being done to me. It's about what God's doing to me. And it's allowing myself that if nothing happens, that's worship. That if something happens, that's worship. If God chooses to speak, if God chooses to remain silent, if God chooses to just be in the room with me and allow me to be aware of that or not aware of that. And this is what we mean when we say, be still and know that I am God. I just know that God is God. And I just remind myself of that for those minutes as I sit there. Now, as you begin to practice this over time, what happens is you'll step into those places and you'll get a little lost in them. And it's almost like you're at one with God. It's what Jesus is talking about in John, in the farewell discourses, 14, 15, 16, and 17. When he prays to his Father in chapter 7, he says that, they would be one with me as I am one with you. Like there's this oneness, this togetherness. As James Finley says, you can't get the ocean in a thimble, but you can put the thimble in an ocean. And it's like you're being made aware that you are being placed inside of the ocean of God. And God's both in you and you are in God. It's both. And contemplation brings you to that space. Now, I will just say this as a way of wrapping this time up today. You are hard-pressed to find in the Christian contemplatives, you're hard-pressed to find a Christian contemplative that was of no earthly good. I remember hearing when I was a kid, he's so heavenly minded he's no earthly good, or she's so heavenly minded she's no earthly good. Like they're just so up in God all the time, they have no connection to issues of social justice, issues of brokenness in a neighborhood, issues of you are hard-pressed to find any Christian contemplative that is disconnected from their neighborhoods, their world. They are reformers, they are revolutionaries, they change the world. And I'm not talking about change by getting people to do their meditation practices or change to get people to believe what they believe. I'm saying they change the world by the way that they live in grace and love and compassion. And we're talking about the Mother Teresa's, the St. Francis of Assisi. We're talking about, Teresa of Avila. We're talking about people that were radical reformers to the world around them, either reforming education, reforming medicine, and bringing hospitals to the world around them. They were doing these things before they became a part of government, a part of democracy, a part of the world. Way back when they were doing those things, that they lived out of that compassionate yearning. the contemplative life brought them so close to God that they felt the heart of God. And when they would come out of that meditative place, out of that contemplative place, they immediately went to work, painting pictures of that out here, of what they were experiencing in here. Pictures of compassion, of love. It is impossible to draw deeply close to God and not draw deeply closely to the world around you. It's impossible. John says it like this in 1 John. How can you say you love God whom you have not seen if you can't love your neighbor, your brother or sister whom you have seen? And there's this direct correlation between how you experience and see God is how you will experience and see the world. It just happens. And so this is another motivation. And people say, I just don't feel compassion. I just don't feel connected to the world. I just don't feel, I just feel like I'm self-centered. I just don't have a sense of otherness. Well, one of the ways to orient yourself in truly altruistic ways, in ways that are not egocentric, in ways that are not about you getting glory or you collecting fame or you being, the way into that is the contemplative life, because your identity gets lost in God. The book of John really is written by a contemplative for contemplatives. That's why, the identity of the writer of the Gospel of John is the beloved disciple. We don't know who this writer is, we just know God loves. And this is the ultimate end goal of the contemplative life, is to be so washed in a characteristic of God that you're no longer seen for your own ego's sake. God is seen for God's character's sake. And this is the way to live. This is it. This is the heartbeat of true living in the Christian way. I think what that leaves us with here today. Let me just come back to the guide. A couple of things for you. One, yesterday, Deborah and I were talking, and I was just like, I haven't worked on this all week long because of COVID. poor Mr. COVID. Let's get blamed for everything. But I was like, I haven't worked on the podcasts. I haven't worked on the scripts. I haven't worked on the handout because I just kind of decided, well, everyone will understand I don't need to do that this week, and we'll just come back and tackle it the next week. And I woke up about 8 in the morning, and I just felt like, you know what? I just feel like I need to do this. We need to do this. And so she jumped over and she started working on the handout, the little workbook on Lectio Divina. I jumped over and started working on the meditations for the podcast. And we worked from like 8 in the morning till 8 at night, just worked on putting all this together. And I'm really grateful for the work that she did with that workbook on Lectio Divina. It turned out just incredibly well written. I think it really gets at the heart of it, especially helping one discern between the difference between meditation and contemplation. I think there's a lot of clarity that comes to that. So I encourage you to download that and follow that this week. I have uploaded 3 of the podcasts for the meditation, so you can follow along Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I've got the script written for the other ones. I just haven't had time to record them, or written for, I think, 2 of the other ones. I got to write 2 more. But I'll have those up by the end of this week as well, so you can follow along in the meditation as I just kind of guide you through that. Just a word about that. I was listening to it just yesterday, and the quality of it's not the best quality, just in terms of like there's a little echo in the room, and so I get kind of frustrated with all that. I want all that to be perfect, and I want to figure out how to do that. But all that aside, like, I just wanted to give a practical tool that would help you and guide you in being able to experience some of these beautiful ways of being ushered into Christ's presence. And as Christians, that's what I think we all long for, just to be ushered into a place where we're aware of it. Like, it's there all the time. In fact, I woke up about, I think it was like 2 in the morning. I woke up, I sat there, I was breathing, and I immediately felt connected to my meditation practice that had happened earlier that day. It was almost like I was back in it. I just sat there for, it was maybe 30 seconds. It wasn't long. It was just really brief. But I just sensed Christ's presence right there, just like breathing right there. And then I kind of faded back into my sleep. And this is one of those things that will happen. Like you just become aware. You become aware of the presence of Christ. And it has a way of not only orienting us, but providing us with the appropriate responses to situations, conversations that go on in our world and in our life. And so I want to encourage you to follow along with that. Now, some of you may have kind of got a late start and you just started the hand practice. Those are going to be up there for a while. So if you're just working through the hand, go ahead and continue to work through the hand. I think it's a really good beginner place because it's like 1 minute and 2 minutes of silence. It's just very, very easy to do, and I'm guiding you kind of through all of that. Once you get through that, though, I would encourage you to step into the Lectio Divina. And the verses that we selected for this week really are oriented around newness and transformation, new beginnings, that kind of a thing. As well as I know, I believe Vivian's going to be walking through, in the Sacred Studies, walking through the book of Isaiah this year. So we have selected a reading from Isaiah chapter 1. All of that to say, we're really just trying to bring all of this together in a way for you to be able to just experience the presence of Christ and watch your spiritual life take on just new peace, strength, vigor, vim and vigor, and an overall sense of joy. Yeah. One final, so I think I said this already, one final thought, but one, just kind of sensing Christ's presence, just one final thought. When you do this, when you step into this place, when you pray, when you contemplate, remember that it's not you striving for God, reaching for God. The truth is, it's Christ reaching through you to God. You couldn't even sit there for 30 seconds if Christ was not loving you into that place. If Christ quit loving you into that space of contemplation, into the seat that you're sitting in, you would immediately disintegrate. The fact that you're on this call right now is an indicator of Christ's love at work in you. And it's the same when you meditate, when you contemplate, and when you grow in that. Let me offer up a word of prayer for us here. Father, Abba, Father, yes. For as many as received him, to them he gave the right to be called the children of God. Yes, we are your children. We are your children. We are your sons. We are your daughters. We are yours. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for everything that it cost you to make this possible. The adoption that you made happen, that we could be brought into your home, your family. We are your children. Thank you so much. I ask, please woo us into your presence through silent and still contemplation. Allow our thoughts to be freed from being held captive to the technology of our world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, the pride of life, the objectifying of everything. Free us, free us, free us, free us. Free our tongues, our mouths, so that we can speak and pray and articulate. And allow us to read your words in ways that are divine. You're at work in all of this. We worship you. We glorify you. Thank you for the word that was made flesh and dwelt among us. Thank you for the sacrifice of your life. Thank you for cleansing, purifying, providing, protecting, delivering. Thank you. Thank you. Today, we conclude our time together of worship by just acknowledging your goodness. You're so good. Now, I pray for everyone that's on this call and those that get on the call later on and look at it later on today, look at the video later on today. My prayer for them is that your blessings would just wash like a waterfall over them, wash over their thoughts with peace, wash over their heart with love, wash over their will, their volition with joy, just flood over them. And there would be a sense that you, Lord, are present with them. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, it was great being with you today. Due to just kind of the nature of how everything's set up here today, I won't be having a discussion time with everyone. I'm just going to kind of send you off with a blessing. But I do want to give you just kind of a couple of announcements, kind of bring you up to speed on what's going to be going on. Next Sunday, we'll be back here. So those of you that have been coming to the in-person gatherings, feel free to come back next Sunday. We look forward to having you. I had somebody ask me if it was okay if they emailed the downloaded file. Yes, you're totally welcome to email that. Share it with whoever you want to share it with, the podcast, the notes, the workbook. You're totally fine to do that. Feel free to do that. In addition to all of that, we'll be back here, like I said, next week. Coming up, not this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday, Bruce and I are going to be doing a 4-part series called Finally Comes the Poet. I'm really excited about this. We're going to be taking 4 poets that are spiritually minded. So we'll be looking at T.S. Eliot. We'll look at St. John of the Cross. We'll look at Mary Oliver. And as we're walking through Gerard Manley Hopkins, as we're walking through these different poets, we're just going to reflect on both their life, a couple of their writings, and then how they, in a contemplative way, connect us with God. I think, just a little plug for this poetry, the poet and what's so significant. I think the thing about poets, it's like my daughter was saying to me, we were hiking the other day, and she's like, why do you like getting outdoors? And so I waxed poetic and cited a few lines of poetry and about, God's presence being in the woods and da-da-da-da-da. And she goes, that's not fair. You're using poetry, and it makes everything different. Everything real, right? And this is the thing about a poet. A poet says something, and we don't get hung up on the syntax. We don't get hung up on the literalness of the words. We actually just feel it. And so it's able to connect with us down here. And I think that's what we'll be experiencing a little bit of. And hopefully, Bruce will be able to give us some tools on how we can write our own poetry or psalms to God. That's one of the things I'm going to be kind of nudging him towards to help us with, so that all of us could walk away from these times and have our own little book of poetry that is expressing ourselves to God, right? So we'll be getting into that. Not this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday we'll be getting into that. I want to just say a word. If you would also hold up in prayer Don Raj and Sharmila. They're under a little bit of financial duress right now. And so if you just hold them up in prayer, this week we're going to be sending them about $5,000 to help. It's just something that, we can do, and we want to do that. And if God puts anything on your heart, just let me know as well, and I'll add that with what we're going to be sending this week to them. And then finally, the building. Just continue to hold us up in prayer as it relates to the building. Our financial situation is basically the same that it was, several months ago. So it's not improving in any way that we can continue to pay the mortgage. We have had several people come through that are interested in purchasing it. And as I've mentioned, there's been one that's been interested in possibly leasing it. So we're exploring all those options, and we were going through the holiday season. And as we walked through the holiday season, everything kind of slowed down. And now it's all starting to pick back up. We have a showing tomorrow. So anyway, just hold us up in prayer as we walk through this season. I have never felt more confident that God is guiding this entire process. I have never been more surrendered than I am right now to that process that God's walking us through. So if you'll just continue to pray, I would so appreciate that. If you'll get your N2Us also ready in the chat, I'm going to send you out with the benediction. And I'm just smiling, just happy, just me here today, and Deborah. All right. May the Lord bless and keep you. May his gospel give you peace. May his spirit fill you with joy. I think I talked for like an hour straight. That's I taught a class once. May his spirit fill you with joy. I taught a class one time for 4.5 hours straight. So I can do this. I can do this. May you be his disciples, making disciples. May his face smile and shine upon you. This morning, I do this little thing every morning. I'm going to share this with you. I just kind of feeling a little bit jolly. Every morning I do these stretches and go through all these like gestures of just like getting my body to connect with God. And one of those gestures that I started about a month ago is, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. I'll do that every day. So, and when I do that, when I do this part and I touch my heart right here, I put a big smile on my face. And I'll be standing in the living room, kind of looking out the window, and I get tickled at myself because I'm smiling and no one is around but God, of course. And so I'm like smiling really big. So may his face shine upon you, and may you be courageous ones, receiving his kingdom in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you all. So many blessings. We'll see you next week. Email, text, reply to the newsletter, whatever it is. Just please keep in touch with us this week, and we will continue to march on through this COVID-infested world with God living inside of our heart. And if we're meditating, who knows? Maybe our immune system will be boosted a little bit more. Maybe that's why I didn't get so sick. Maybe because I've been meditating every day. I've been doing 20 minutes of silent meditation. Maybe that is what was going on. I already feel better. So those of you that were like nervous about hanging out with me, well, I am meditating, so you're not going to get sick. Love you all.